Francis Ngannou is on the MMA Hour right now, talking to my old partner, Ariel Hawani. And Francis said, man, I'd like to box twice this year. The last that we heard on Francis, the current plan with the PFL, right? Everything's a plan, but it can change tomorrow. But in all fairness, the current plan, or the last that we had heard, PFL's going to have 2 offerings on pay-per-view. Francis is going to be reserved for the pay-per-view offerings. One will be in February, which, by the way, is next month. Is that still going forward? And one will be in November. And the expectation was that Francis would come to the November pay-per-view. The November pay-per-view, for frame of reference, is the one being offered to Nate Diaz to be opposite Jake Paul. So Francis came out and said, and by the way, and the PFL was saying, we believe the first thing Francis is going to do is box. So we're not planning for him for the February pay-per-view. Of the 2 offerings we have of February, November, and Francis is reserved for, we're only expecting him for one of them. Oh, and by the way, he's discussing boxing right now, so we think it's going to be November. In other words, there's time for Francis as it pertains to MMA. And when Francis went on Ariel today, as I said, things can change, but Francis did say, I'd like to box twice this year, and I cannot guarantee that I will do PFL this year. Now, one constant that nobody has disagreed with, thank goodness, right? I mean, what is possibly the point of having a contract? Guys aren't going to honor the contract. Why even have one? But thank goodness, it does appear that we have one thing within that is agreed on, which is if Francis does MMA, it will be with the PFL. That doesn't have to be this year, but the next time he does it, if he does it, it's over there. All right. But it's important that we know that. It's important that we know that contract bought something. And everybody appears to be fine with this idea. I mean, even Ariel accepted it, ate it right up. I heard about it. I'm talking to you guys about it. I'm fine with it as well. If I were in Francis's spot, I would also prefer to be able to go and do the boxing. Try my hand at that. Get a few in. And if I was in the PFL spot, I don't want to just bring him over. I got a few bullets there. And why rush it? And why rush it can be answered in most situations. You say, well, because if you don't rush, it's a window and and you could never get it all. Well, sometimes you're better not having it at all. And there's a number of athletes within MMA whose careers ended because of their contracts, because of the generosity of their contract. Ronda Rousey had such a beautiful contract, she had to be the main event of a pay-per-view, or it doesn't work. And when you got to who you have to fight to headline and sell out and do all the things responsible for a pay-per-view, that person ended up being pretty good. They didn't have to be early in the career. Just had to be a warm body, but it got to where it needed to be pretty good. And the rankings kind of got situated. They kind of got figured out. So that part of the placement, which is where you have to be because of the lucrativeness of the contract, is what forced the retirement as opposed to just working your way down the card. Having some fun back in your career out like most athletes would do. I suggest that from Francis's standpoint, right? You have the PFL and they're not pushing and they're not knocking. They're very much, hey, do the boxing. That makes sense. But from what we're told of that contract, Francis, when he fights, will get a guaranteed $5 million, and the opponent will get $2 million. So you have $7 million, and even conservatively, you'll put $1 million into the promotion of that. Now, even if your numbers start to come back that this isn't going to work, we have the wrong match, you'll still put $1 million towards promoting it. So now you're looking at an $8 million what? $8 million what? Do you think you could recover that? Could you? If you were in charge and had those pieces, could you recoup $8 million on Francis? No, well, gosh, of course you could not. So those become your options. Do I let him go? Do I get a little PR if I can? Do I come out looking, or do I go take this now? And it's one of those spots that I feel as though the PFL's done everything right. And I don't know that I could put anything on Francis. Francis has not been loyal to them in any fashion, but I don't know that I can put that on Francis. What does surprise me is that nobody will call him out. I mean, nobody of any realistic fashion will call Francis. So somebody did call him out, but I can't produce. I watched the call out and I can't produce the name for it. And I'm not being a condescending jerk. I said, but there's not. You're right. There's realistic guys that could go out and get $2 million to fight Francis. Not one of those guys has muttered his name. And it's out of fear, right? Fear and respect go hand in hand, but it's out of fear nonetheless. But you appear to be safe. He's for sure not coming till November, and now he told Ariel that it doesn't look like he's coming. At least not in 2024. Well, these big and reasonable names that I'm talking about for a phrase, they're not going to be around in 2025. 2025 represent when he becomes available represents 3 fights. You don't have 3 top fighters anywhere. You go to Jon Jones. You could go any way you want to do it just to have fun. There's not 3 top guys that got 3 fights left in them. Well, not to mention it would be 4 that are going to do 3 fights before they get to. So we just hear that they're safe. They're safe. You can come out, you can talk, you can call them out, you can get the headlines, you can build some attraction. You can start to get this $8 million loss where you can start to work that hole up a little bit. And it might even be a kick in the pants, but a $4 million kick in the pants is better than an $8 million, right? You start coming out of that hole and you're the guy that did it. You're very likely to get that match. And that guy doesn't exist, not even the beginnings of it. Not even the beginning conversation or dialogue, not even the call out, right? What you're going to do, and then you're going to get laughed at. We're all going to tell you you don't deserve it and you can't get it and it shouldn't be you. But that's the step. That's the first piece of courage that you're going to need to show. Fighting Francis and stepping in there is going to require courage. So the first one that you can demonstrate by saying that you would like it and then dealing with the haters online. And that's a really hard thing for fighters to do, but it has greatly surprised me that nobody is going for that match. And here we are. Looks like the sport of MMA isn't going to have Francis back until 2025. Make sure you understand. If Francis versus Joshua in a normal pretext did not go Francis's way, if he became 0-2, or if he became 0-2 and it wasn't overly competitive, right? I mean, it would seem that there's a scenario where that experiment in boxing is now done. But for Francis to go and say, I'd like to do 2 boxing, right? This is a guy that likes to be right. Not to mention, this is a guy who so far has been right. The predictions that he tells us so far have been right. So my guess is the statement of I would like to do 2 boxings meant when I agreed to fight Joshua, I got a promise that regardless of outcome, I get 1 more this year. That's my interpretation. So, got all these heavyweights that are very safe. They're very safe to go out there and start building headlines. But not one of them has. And I don't predict that that's going to change.